Good evening. Welcome to this Tuesday, June 4th, 2019 meeting of the Raymore Planning and Zoning Commission. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Let me remind commissioners, please make sure your microphone is lighted green and speak into the mic for the record. And we will call roll. Commissioner Wiggins.
Present.
Commissioner Armstrong. Commissioner Bowie. Commissioner Crane. Commissioner Fizer.
Present.
Commissioner Peterman.
Present.
Commissioner Urquia.
Present.
Mayor Turnbow. And Commissioner Faulkner is present. We do barely have a quorum this evening. And we have no personal appearances scheduled this evening. So that takes us to consent agenda, approval of minutes from our May 21st, 2019 meeting. And I would note a small sheet in front of you with corrections. So I think, Mr. Zur, we could entertain a motion to approve minutes as presented.
With the amendments, or do you? Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the May 21st, 2019 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, along with including the amended corrections. Page 2, fourth line from the bottom, changing Riley Gaston to Briley Gaston. And page 6, ninth line, changing Mr. Zur stated no further action at this point would be a no recommendation sent to the council by deletion of A before no recommendation.
Second.
Thank you. Second by Commissioner Wiggins. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 3, 4, 5. Good. And that's 5 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. And moving along, we have nothing this evening under unfinished business. So we will move into new business. And our first of 2 cases this morning is case 19006, the Lofts at Fox Ridge site plan amendment. And there you, I blinked and you're there. Would the applicant like to present your case, please? Oh, sorry. Is it lighted?
There we go. Okay, now we're on.
Now we're
Cassie
great.
Pabin, 10340 North 84th Street, Omaha, Nebraska, 68122, appearing on behalf of the applicant. We're here before you again just as an amendment to the site plan that was approved last fall by this body. Really, the only major change that you'll see from the site plan that you approved last fall to the one that's before you now with the amendment is previously, if you'll remember, we had a long structure in the back. As we refined the site plan a little bit more, started working with contractors and our engineers a little bit more and refining what that looked like, the decision was made to basically split that big, huge building into 2 separate buildings and then pull out parking, garage covered parking, and place it along the site. So those really are the 2 major changes. Really, quite frankly, the only changes to the site plan that was previously approved. I would note we closed on everything, bank loan, property, everything this morning. And we will close on the Chapter 100 incentive next Tuesday. And once we have approval of construction drawings from the city and everything that we need there, we anticipate starting to move dirt late summer, early fall. And happy to entertain any questions you might have.
I'm perhaps jumping ahead, but while you're at the podium, I think I noted in staff report that there were considerable number of additional covered parking spaces. And I love that idea. I'm just curious what the driver was for that change.
A couple of different things. So as we had started working through not just the city council process, but really refining what that ultimate look and feel, finalizing that so we could get to a point where we have construction drawings to submit to permit. two different things occurred. One of them was when we took basically the pedestal parking that was underneath the long structure out and started putting it in place. It's a matter of economics. So adding those in other places, and once you're doing it, it just makes more sense to add more when you're doing it. We also started looking at, on these surface stalls, or the parking lots, if you will, looking at various canopy structures. So it was just a matter of what made the most sense at the time, and making sure that we still had the covered stalls. And actually, I think we ended up with more covered stalls when we removed that from out underneath than what we had originally proposed.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Zur, something to add?
If I might, real quickly, I just want to make sure, and while Ms. Pavin is up here at the microphone, staff had its recommendation for approval subject to a number of conditions itemized as 1 through 15. Just for purposes of making our record this evening, I want to make sure that she's had the opportunity to review that and that the applicant is in favor of those recommendations, or if they have any concerns.
We don't have any concerns and are in favor of the recommendations.
Mm-hmm. And I assume the conditions are still pretty much the same as when the case was originally presented, Mr. Gress?
Yes, sir, you're correct. The only conditions that were removed, if you remember, running concurrently with their site plan application, was an application for preliminary plat approval and rezoning. Since those have been approved, those were taken out of the conditions as part of this, since those have already been approved.
Okay, thank you. And one more question.
You sure?
So thank you for the answer on the move to covered parking. So you or Mr. Gress, did we end up with the same number of total parking places, or did we lose or gain anything in that move?
With the dispersion of the parking spaces, the amount of parking that was provided previously as part of the approved site plan is similar to what's provided under the amendment.
Okay. No significant change. That's a good thing, too. Thank you. Any other questions from the commission before we go to staff report? Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Mr. Gress.
Thank you, sir. The applicant, Ms. Pavin, covered it all pretty nicely, so I won't dive too far into the details. But thinking back to, again, October timeframe of 2018, this application initially came before the commission for site plan approval. That initial site plan that was approved by the commission included 11 buildings in addition to one clubhouse facility as well that housed a number of residential amenities for the residents of that development. And as Ms. Pavin noted, the only change that has taken place was the splitting up of one larger building into two separate buildings. So now, as the applicant indicated, there's a total of 12 residential structures on the property in addition to the same clubhouse that was proposed previously, as well as the addition of 9 covered parking stalls throughout the site. Just to refresh your memory a little bit, I've included an aerial location of where the property's at and some photos of the site as it exists today. And as I just mentioned previously, when this application was going through back in October, they were running a rezoning request concurrently with that. It was approved by City Council back in October, and so as it stands today, the entire site is zoned R3B, which allows it to be developed as a cohesive apartment community, which the applicant stated is their intention here pretty quickly, hopefully. Looking at some of the staff comments, I'll just outline again the major changes that are being proposed here. The most major one would be the addition of 9 additional parking garages that were kind of split up from that major surface pedestal building that the applicant was mentioning. That includes 83 covered parking spaces throughout the site. If I remember correctly, the covered parking that was initially proposed only held, I think, 60 to 65 spaces. So as Ms. Pavin indicated, we're actually gaining some additional covered parking that we didn't have before, which I'm sure she can talk about. That's a huge amenity that I think residents look for in apartment developments such as this one. So a really good change that staff is really happy with. The other one was the reconfiguration of the previously approved Building 4, which was the larger building along the back property line. That has since, again, been broken up into 2 smaller buildings, generally in the same location that they were proposed previously. And then the least significant of the changes was the slight reconfiguration of the clubhouse near the entrance off of Fox Ridge Drive. Previously on the approved site plan, it was more of a north-south orientation with parking to the north of the clubhouse. And the applicant and their team has since revised that to be a little bit more of an east-west orientation with a really nice entrance feature and parking right off of Fox Ridge Drive. And so it'll look really nice as you're coming into the development right off Fox Ridge. A couple things to touch on just relative to the changes as they might apply to the site. With regards to parking, the minimum number of stalls based on the total number of units and amenities provided on the site is 609 stalls. And with the addition of covered parking, they're still right at that minimum requirement of 609 parking spaces, so still meeting that requirement. And of that, 13 ADA compliant spaces are required, and 13 spaces have been provided throughout the site. With regard to building design, the two newer buildings that are being proposed will be consistent with the other building types that are being proposed on the rest of the site, and the parking garages will be consistent with the materials that are used on those buildings as well. So the two new residential structures as well as the garage structures will be consistent with the building design standards of the UDC. With regards to pedestrian access still being provided off of Fox Ridge Drive, the reorientation of the clubhouse actually provided a really nice opportunity to tie that residential courtyard in between all those buildings together. And based on the plans that were submitted today for construction, there's a really extensive network of sidewalk links that connect all the buildings on the site very nicely and provide a really nice amenity for the development. As usual, staff did share the proposed changes with the fire district for review and comment. The district didn't have any objections to any of the changes that were being made, but they did reiterate the need and the desire for the temporary access drive off of the Ridgeway Drive that currently ends in the northwest corner of the site. And the plans that were submitted do indicate that the applicant does intend to construct that temporary emergency access up until Ridgeway is extended sometime in the future. So no issues with the fire district on this application. Staff did submit proposed findings of fact on the application. Looking at the timeline, of course, the commission does have final approval over site plans and site plan amendments. So this evening will be the final action for this case. Overall, staff recommends that the Planning Commission accept the staff proposed findings of fact and approve case 19006 Lofts at Fox Ridge site plan amendment subject to the conditions as outlined below. That will include staff report. If there are any questions on myself, I'd be happy to answer them. And as Ms. Papen indicated, she's in the audience and more than willing to answer any questions the commission might have.
I've got one. Commissioner Wiggins.
Thank you. Just confirm the 609 parking spaces, that includes the garage spaces, or the garage spaces are in addition to the 609?
It includes the garage spaces as well.
Thank you.
Just curious about the open space at, I guess it would be the northeast corner. I think that's not really floodplain, but green space, stream corridor.
There's a stream corridor that runs through there, yes.
Yeah.
So that's not any different than before, I'm sure.
No.
Okay. Commissioner Urquilla, question?
Nope, I just want to make a motion.
Oh, you're eager. Any other questions? Okay.
No.
Commissioner Urquilla.
Sure. I'd like to propose a motion to accept the staff proposed findings of fact and approve case number 19006 Lofts at Fox Ridge site plan amendment, subject to the sequential conditions 1 through 15 that are listed in the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay, motion by Commissioner Urquilla, second by Commissioner Peterman to approve, I guess, accept staff proposed findings of fact and approve case 19006 Lofts at Fox Ridge site plan amendment, subject to the 15 conditions noted in staff report. Sound right? Okay, is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Lucky for everybody, it's 5 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions. Thank you. And that takes us ahead, Mr. Grass, to case 19009, annual review of the Unified Development Code, and I'm sure you're raring to go on that one.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Thinking back to the December 2008 timeframe when the UDC was initially adopted, the several years after that, in 2012, the commission outlined a process for staff to go through and periodically review the contents of that code to ensure that they're producing the types and quality of development that the elected bodies and the residents of the city expect to see in the city. And so as part of that, staff goes through every year and just takes a look at the existing code and tries to think of issues or concerns that were faced in the previous year and tries to address ways that we can avoid facing the same issues in the future. And so this would represent the 31st amendment to the Unified Development Code proposed. Since 2008, there have been 29 amendments approved through the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council, the most recent of which was the 30th proposed amendment to the Unified Development Code, which was actually discussed at our May 21st meeting and dealt with the keeping of fowl on single-family residential lots. And then the next most recent one after that would be the recent change in sidewalk width and residential developments from 4 foot to 5 foot. So every year, staff brings forward a menu of different topics and items for discussion from the commission. And then following that discussion, the commission has the ability to either direct staff to move forward with all or some of the proposed amendments to bring them back forward for a formal consideration by the commission and council. So this evening, I've identified a handful of items that are worthy of discussion in staff's mind, and we're excited to share those with you all and hopefully get some direction to move forward with them here in the near future. I've outlined all of the previous amendments as they've pertained to the UDC, so if you have any questions on those and the history of it, I'd be more than happy to answer that as well. But I will jump into the proposed amendments or the topics considered or topics for consideration by the Planning and Zoning Commission. I'll go through these one by one, and certainly if there are any questions on individual topics, feel free to stop me and ask any questions if you have any. Otherwise, we can regroup for a discussion at the end as we wrap this up. Looking at number one, actually number one and number two kind of go hand in hand. Back in November 1st of 2018, the Community Development Department, as it was once called before, was actually renamed to the Development Services Department in an effort to kind of broaden or kind of accentuate the different services that our department actually offers. We do a lot more than just community development with building inspections and GIS and all the staff that we have in our department. So because of that, there are several instances within the Unified Development Code that reference either Community Development Director or Community Development Department. And so in an effort to make that consistent between all of our other applications that we've updated, staff feels that it's necessary to go through and change all of those instances and correct them to be consistent with our department.
Any questions, comments? All right, let's proceed.
Perfect. The number 3 deals with the attendance policy as it relates to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Currently, there are rules and requirements in place that apply to city council members, park board members, as well as members of our arts commission that deal with periodically missing meetings for unexcused or excused absences. And so staff would like to add language into the UDC to be consistent across the board for all of our boards and commissions. So the language would add a requirement for a member's unexcused absence from 3 consecutive regular meetings in a 12-month period, or more than 25% of the commission's regular meetings in a 12-month period constitutes a neglect of duty and would begin the process of removal from the Planning and Zoning Commission. Hasn't been too much of an issue here recently with our Planning and Zoning Commission, but certainly as more and more applications come in, it becomes critical to have a quorum for these meetings and so that we can conduct the business that the commission is charged with.
Right, summer's always a little bit tricky too.
Absolutely, yes. You get into the summers when teachers have off and families start to travel, attendance becomes a little more difficult to manage. So if approved, of course, there are the bylaws and rules and procedures that the Planning Commission has in addition to that. So if the commission decides to move forward with that, following the adoption of that amendment to the UDC, we would revisit the rules and bylaws of the Planning and Zoning Commission to make sure those 2 documents are
Might be
consistent.
our first visit in several years for the bylaws.
Very well could be.
Mr. Zur, one of the keys to me in that sentence, a member's unexcused absence from 3 consecutive regular meetings, yada, yada. So I think I'm comfortable with that just based on common sense, but do we have any experience with any of the other commissions, for instance, to know what constitutes excused or unexcused?
I will try to artfully respond to that. There was some discussion amongst the Charter Review Commission when they were established in the most recent go-around, where unexcused absences were debated, I believe, on more than one night. The notion being that in most cases, if you're able to announce at the prior meeting that you're not going to be there, or if you at least provide a heads up of where you're going to be, that would keep you from being able to attend, most of the time those are going to be identifiable as an unexcused absence. If you do not provide any update prior to your appearance or prior to the meeting, that's identified as an unexcused absence. Did I
Yeah,
get that wrong?
I
I got
think
that
you
turned
said it
around.
backwards,
I
but
said it
yeah.
backwards, yes. But if there's any prior notification to staff or members of the commission that an individual is not going to be there, that would be identifiable as an excused absence, otherwise unexcused. And it's a self-regulation as far as I'm concerned.
Makes sense to me. Other commissioners have any concerns, comments? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Gress, please go
Sir.
ahead.
Moving on to page number 11, the fourth change that staff has proposed deals with section 480.030 as it pertains to remedies enforcement powers as it would relate to the revocation of plans or other approvals through any elected body. Currently, if you think about the conditional use permit process or even the site plan approval process through the Planning and Zoning Commission or City Council, there are mechanisms within our code that allow either the Planning and Zoning Commission in some cases or the City Council to revoke conditional use permits or enforce conditions of site plans if staff finds out that the conditions that were approved as part of that are not being followed. Similarly, if you look at the Board of Adjustment as they deal with variances, it's very common to have conditions placed on the approval of variances, specifically variances of use, where a particular use might not be allowed within a zoning district, but based on the context and the location of the building, it might make sense to allow that type of use within that facility. However, it has been noted that within our section of code, the Board of Adjustment currently does not have the power to revoke a variance of use application should those conditions not be followed by the applicant. And staff believes that board definitely should have that ability to do that in the instances where conditions that are placed on an approval are not being followed.
Questions or comments, Commissioner? Okay. All right. Mr. Gress, let's go ahead.
Number 5 deals with section 470.160, which deals with the site plan review procedure, often referenced a lot by developers and applicants as they start approaching the city to understand the requirements for site plan applications and the site plan review process. Section 470.010B currently includes language that requires a pre-application meeting for site plan review. However, under the actual site plan review process within the Unified Development Code, there is no language that requires that. And so this staff would like to add that language within the Unified Development Code in order to make those two sections consistent with each other as it relates to site plan review for projects within the city.
Sounds good. Commission? All right. Go
Alrighty.
ahead, please.
Number 6, moving on to page, I guess in between page 11 and 12, deals with the use-specific standards for residential uses within the city, specifically the building design of single-family attached units as well as multiple family dwellings. So think townhomes, duplexes, eightplexes, and so on. Currently within our code, there's a number of design requirements that those types of buildings must comply with, similar to the commercial design standards for commercial buildings or the design standards we talked about tonight with the lofts at Fox Ridge. Understanding, how the residential market is changing and that, single-family construction is kind of starting to slow down and there's a little bit more of an interest placed on the development of multifamily housing. Staff is trying to think about what in our code can we place in there to increase the quality of those types of developments as those applications might start to come in. What types of things will make those types of developments a little more visual appealing. Oftentimes with townhome development and duplexes, there's a lot of monotony with those with the same elevation and same floor plan repeated over and over again. And so staff has provided a list of 7, if you will, kind of a menu of design guidelines, 3 of which any developer or applicant would be able to choose from to include within their development. Things from, changes in roof elevations or roof pitches, variations in building facades, varied setbacks from the building to break up that kind of wall of buildings that you would typically see in a development like that. or just other architectural elements or design features that an applicant might see fit can also be approved through our department if so chose.
Sorry, spring is sprung. Okay, Commission, any discussion on proposed change in Section 6? Okay. All right, Mr. Grass.
Perfect. Moving on to section number 7, again, dealing with the use-specific standards for single-family attached and multifamily residential dwellings. 3 sections here, some of which staff has had a couple issues with before, and so just trying to think about how we can address those in the future. The first one deals with guest parking. I'm sure if you've ever driven through a townhome development, you'll realize that some of those units can get pretty close together. Driveways are often spaced pretty close together, and so the availability of on-street parking for guests, it can be pretty limited. Once your single car garage fills up and your single lane driveway fills up with cars, there's not a lot of room left over for additional parking. And so doing some research on other communities and kind of what their requirements are, staff has proposed that as part of that development, with the parking that's required for that unit itself, one additional parking space for guest parking for every 4 units, staff believes would be an appropriate off-street parking requirement to satisfy some of those visitors that might be, don't live in the unit, but they're there to visit their friends or their family for the evening, and they want a place to park that's not clogging up the street. So that would equate to the equivalent of 0.25 additional parking spots per unit, which again would equate to 1 physical parking spot for each townhome development.
I'd like it if you'll fix the Q's in a couple of places to G's.
Absolutely.
Request to guest. Not a biggie. That's all I had. Okay.
Great. And number 8 deals with, again, kind of the aesthetics of multifamily housing and denser developments. I'm sure if you've ever noticed on a Wednesday or Thursday driving through the city, there's no shortage of trash bins sitting out waiting to be picked up and put back away. The difficult thing with townhome developments, as I'm sure you're aware, is they're often designed with single car garages and single lane driveways. So once the car's in there or the storage that's stored inside the garage is in there, there's not a lot of room left over for anything else. And oftentimes the trash can or the recycling bin is the first thing to be placed outside on the driveway or on the side of the house. And so when you start thinking at 2 bins per unit, 8 bins per building, and multiply that by any number of buildings within a development, you can start to see that trash cans can really start to clog up and affect the visual appeal of those types of developments. So staff would like to add a requirement that would essentially require those to be either screened, stored inside, or just protected from the view when they're not being in use. Obviously, when they're out for trash day, they're still going to be allowed to be at the curb. But as far as storage, staff would like to see a requirement there for those to be screened from view.
Right. Commissioner Wiggins.
So just for clarification, when it says trash and recycling receptacles shall be provided within the development for use of the residents, to me that sounds like a dumpster as opposed to carts. Is that, or is that what we're implying? Or like there are Fox Ridge, there's a couple different, duplex, quadplex locations. Are we saying that a dumpster would need to be provided by the landlord, or are we saying that on the sides of the individual units there needs to be an enclosure? Because to me that sounds like it's saying the landlord needs to provide a dumpster.
Sure.
Which is a whole different issue.
And it would actually apply a little bit to both. With townhome developments, it's more common than not to have individual trash cans for those units. However, similar to the development we looked at tonight with the lofts at Fox Ridge, it's more common in those types of developments to have physical dumpsters and physical recycling bins, all of which would need to be required to be screened. One of the things, as you look at the requirements for solid waste service within the city, there's a threshold of essentially the number of units within a building that either qualifies or disqualifies that unit to be served by our citywide contract of trash service. Anything above that threshold requires that property owner to contract privately with another waste disposal company.
Okay.
And so more often than not, that would be the placement of a dumpster within that facility to coordinate one single pickup location. And even in the instance where they wanted to contract with a separate company to pick up individual bins, the design requirement would still apply.
Okay. Because I think of Wednesday mornings when I'm driving my kids to daycare and I pass through some of these developments where they have all their parking is off street, but then they have to take across a grass section to get their bins out. So they're not even really even being served at their unit with trash services because it has to be brought out to the street, which adds a whole nother layer of issues.
Sure.
Yeah. And I would note, again, last week, not the first time, but my neighborhood trash pickup is supposed to be on Wednesday. They picked up the recycle. They did not pick up the trash carts until Thursday, so the carts are out for 2 days instead of one.
Correct.
And that, to me, that's an issue that city council probably is already dealing with. Yeah, yeah. So just an added concern.
And if directed to do so, staff would be more than willing to do some research to kind of refine this language to eliminate some of the confusion and some of the vagueness in that, to specify what exactly it is we're talking about, if so directed.
Right. Since we're on this, I think if we go ahead and recommend you proceed forward with these, doesn't that sound like a good idea based on your concerns, Commissioner Wiggins?
That would be fine, but I think Mr. Grass also noted elsewhere there are other things that document the service of a dumpster or whatever, and so therefore a bunch of quadplexes would not necessarily qualify for dumpsters, and it would be carts, and so it's already covered. So to me, he addressed my concern.
Okay. I think going forward, since it's a proposed change to the UDC that would have to go through city council as well, makes sense to have a solid story there, right? Sure. Good.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Please
then
proceed.
The last section here, number 9, foundation as-built as required. Again, as you start looking at these types of multifamily developments, when they get, denser and denser, it's oftentimes common for the infrastructure for those developments to be installed, and then there's oftentimes a lull in between when actual building permits get installed. Not entirely uncommon, but it is something that has happened here in the past. In the instances where that happens, once that infrastructure is installed, it's in the ground. It becomes really expensive to either relocate it or install new infrastructure. And oftentimes, when you have the potential for a separate property owner down the road to come in and purchase that property after that infrastructure has already been installed, without knowing specifically where that infrastructure has been placed, there is a potential for foundations to be poured either within an easement of a property or over a utility line, a sewer line, or a water line, unbeknownst to the person that's actually building those units. And those errors often aren't uncovered until there is an issue with the sewer line or the water line or the infrastructure that it's been placed over. And so we've added this in here. It wouldn't necessarily need to be required by every type of multifamily development. It would be deemed kind of at the discretion of our public works director as he sees so fit. But the importance of that foundation as-built survey is extremely critical when you start looking at the setbacks and the adjacency of these structures to one another, and the little amount of room that you can have sometimes in between those developments. It becomes critical to know exactly where those utilities are at and where those foundations are at, so you don't run into those issues in the future.
Okay. Questions or comments? You good? Okay. All right. I think we move ahead to what I'm going to call Section 8.
Yes, sir. So Section 8, a little bit related to the previous sections we talked about with the additional requirements for parking, deals with Section 425.020A of the Unified Development Code. It's just amending the use table as it's required for parking spaces as it's outlined by uses. So again, for single-family attached dwelling units and multifamily dwelling units of 3 units or more, we would suggest adding the requirement for the 2 parking spaces per dwelling unit or the 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit, depending on the type of use, and then adding language plus the 0.25 parking spaces per dwelling unit for guest parking.
Yeah, and that's kind of important for consistency.
Correct.
Questions, comments? All right, moving ahead, I'll call it Section 9.
Sir, thank you. Last but certainly not least of our amendments here is Section 9, which deals with Section 445.030 as it pertains to subdivision design regulations, specifically the design requirements and dimensional requirements for public streets within the city. Unfortunately, Mr. Rokos was not able to make the meeting tonight, but one of the first things that he did when he joined the city was revise and update the Public Works design and spec manual that they use to work with contractors and developers as they construct new subdivisions within the city. Once that was updated, this actually section of code was not updated to be consistent with that, and in order to avoid having to update 2 sections of code every time a section of that spec manual changes, the Public Works Department has requested that some of the design requirements actually be taken out of the Unified Development Code and live solely within their design manual. It's a lot easier, again, to kind of wrangle one section of code as it pertains to Public Works than having to update 2 sections of code within the city. And unfortunately, I didn't think to provide a copy of that spec manual with you. There's actually some really helpful information in there as it would pertain to the commission, and
I
certainly
don't have a problem with that. Is it available on city's website?
it is.
So
Yes.
it's there if we need to look. I think that makes good sense. We've made some prior changes to consolidate and put in one place.
Yes.
That's probably helpful from a standpoint of not having contradictory guidance, Mr. Zer.
And in fact, the city staff is working to go through the entirety of the code in order to make similar changes and references to consolidate and avoid duplication. So this kind of complies with an overall view that the staff is taking on these issues.
Good. Before we move to topics for discussion, does Commission have any questions, comments about what we've covered so far? No? Okay, Mr. Grass?
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Moving on for just general topics that staff sees important for any upcoming items that you might see. The first one would be the rules and regulations that were recently passed regarding small cell wireless facilities within municipalities. House Bill 1991, which was approved back in 2018, established the Uniform Small Wireless Facility Deployment Act, and essentially it allows wireless providers, AT&T, Comcast, et cetera, to co-locate small wireless facilities on poles that are located within the right-of-way of cities. So think light poles, traffic signals, utility poles, et cetera. There are currently within City Code and the Unified Development Code, there are regulations for larger cell towers within the city, but we don't currently have any regulations as it would pertain to these types of facilities. And so city staff desires to establish local requirements that must be followed in order to install those facilities within the right-of-way. Staff is currently working with the Public Works Department to prepare a draft ordinance that would appear before the Planning and Zoning Commission for consideration at a later date.
Any questions? Okay. All right. Go ahead, please.
Perfect. On to letter B, with the recent approval by the Missouri voters for the amendment that establishes the right to access medical marijuana, obviously those applications are going to be coming in here probably sooner than later for facilities to locate not only in Raymore but all across Missouri. So staff has been preparing ordinances and doing a lot of research on reasonable regulations on medical marijuana related businesses and uses, and trying to figure out where in the city within what zoning districts do those different types of uses make sense. So again, staff is currently preparing an amendment to the UDC that would establish which zoning districts that those types of activities can take place, and would likely be followed up with a companion ordinance similar to what we saw with the chicken discussion, that would amend the actual general city code that the city of Raymore has, that would establish some more specific regulations as far as the design requirements, security requirements, ventilation, and things of that nature. If you're familiar at all with the regulations that the state has put out, they are pretty onerous and pretty stringent on the requirements, and so it would take a pretty significant update to city code to be consistent with that. But staff is working on an amendment to the UDC proposed that would again establish which zoning districts those types of activities would be permitted in.
Okay. Questions or comments? All right. Do any of the commissioners have any items that they'd wish to add for staff to work on?
On the medical marijuana facilities, could you do some research maybe on Colorado on what their guidelines and outlines have been?
Actually, we've had an opportunity, and I'm sure those will be incorporated and reviewed as well, but Mark, the Mid-America Regional Council, has organized a group of individuals from surrounding cities so that there can kind of be a consensus on how we are going to be applying zoning provisions as it relates to the medical marijuana issue. It's my hope that we will be able to get relatively soon some real guidance from Mark and some of the other surrounding communities so that we can maintain cohesiveness on that issue.
And then in regards to that same topic, I'm sure there's been research done as far as the conflicting laws from the state level to the federal level. How, as a city, are we going to be compliant with federal law by allowing these types of facilities in our community?
That's mostly a concern for the facilities that are operating at this particular time, where they bank, how they deposit their funds, how they are operating their individual businesses for accounting purposes, because those are going to have more federal oversights than the local zoning ordinances are concerned. So I think from a perspective of the Planning and Zoning Commission's interests, we address our zoning on a local basis. We have state authority that allows us to do our zoning within the city. I think that is more of an issue as far as the federal violations are concerned for the operators of the entities or the operators of the businesses. We will not be in business with any of them.
Okay. And that segues me into my next question, which is from a depository standpoint, one of the major issues in Colorado was that federally insured banks couldn't accept their deposits. So are we aware of any financial institutions within the community that are going to be willing to work with these types of businesses so that we can know that our community remains safe and secure?
I don't believe I have enough information to answer that question.
Okay. Can we look into that?
Absolutely. I can say to date, staff has received a number of inquiries about whether or not what the City of Raymore's guidelines will be, but we have not received any formal applications to date. And of course, just a few months ago, the City Council actually passed a moratorium on the acceptance of any applications. So even if we were to receive any applications from individuals within the community, we would not process those or review them until that moratorium was lifted,
Okay.
or until those regulations could be put in place to address those concerns.
We are also expecting state regulations on the issue as well, which should provide the cities with a little additional guidance.
Okay.
Are there other questions or comments? Anything anyone would like to add for commission to review, or, excuse me, for staff to review at this time? Yeah, we can always do that at another meeting as well. Mr. Zur, I'm thinking here we might like your guidance on a motion. Would it simply be a motion to accept?
Do you want me to give it a stab, and then you can tell me if I'm off base?
Oh, you're a brave soul. Have at.
I'd like to make a, well, let me get back to the top here real quick, sorry. Sorry, I went too far. Hang on. Boom, here we go. Sorry. I'd like to make a motion to approve case number 19009, the annual review of the Unified Development Code, by accepting the staff recommended changes to the sections that have been outlined to us tonight. And yeah, can just leave it at that. Sure.
Yeah.
So my suggestion would be that the motion be to accept staff's recommendations on case number 19009 and instruct staff to proceed forward with the drafting of the appropriate
Changes.
the appropriate amendment, and I believe that would be amendment number 31
Okay.
for purposes of presentation back to the commission at a later time.
All right, so then I'll say I'd like to make a motion to approve staff recommended findings of facts on case number 19009, the annual review of the Unified Development Code, taking into consideration the changes that have been outlined for amendment number 31 for presentation to the City Council for approval.
It'll actually come back before the Planning and Zoning Commission beforehand.
Okay.
That's good.
Then for first review.
Second.
Thank you. All right, motion by Commissioner Kia, second by Commissioner Wiggins to, I'm not going to try to restate this, but it was well stated. Thank you, Mr. Zur, and
Say with help.
Commissioner Kia, basically to accept staff recommendations on the UDC annual review and instruct staff to proceed to draft a 31st amendment to the UDC. That close? Okay, was motioned by Commissioner Kia, second by Commissioner Wiggins. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you very much. And that's what it takes to pass this evening. All right. Mr. Zur, I believe we're ready for City Council report.
Chairman, I will be short on this one. Since your last meeting, the City Council has participated in a work session, and we had a holiday that we celebrated. So I have nothing to present this evening with regard to a City Council report.
That works. All right. Mr. Grass, would you please present staff report this evening?
Absolutely. First thing you'll notice that in your packet was included was the April 2019 monthly report. At the time these were sent out, the May monthly report was not quite finished yet, but I have placed a copy in front of you all this evening. Just looking at some of the activities that have been taking place here as they would pertain to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Looking back at the Brightside Daycare facility over there off of 58 near the intersection of 58 and J Highway, previously approved by the Planning and Zoning Commission back in 2018. They opened their building for business early 2019 and soon realized that it wasn't quite big enough and submitted a permit for a small addition to that facility. And last month, a temporary certificate of occupancy was issued for that expansion, and they are open for business. There's some small paving and striping of the parking lot that's still left to do there, but obviously with the rain that we've had here recently, that's been a little difficult for them to accomplish. So I hope they plan to wrap that up here towards the end of this month. Additionally, this month, construction commenced on the expansion of Benton House. I'm not sure how many of you all were on the commission when that project was previously approved, but they did contemplate an expansion there of some additional bed space at the time of their initial site plan was approved, and they are finally at the point where they're needing to add some additional bed space to their building. And so staff went to the ribbon cutting along with some members of City Council just a few weeks ago to facilitate the groundbreaking of that. They do intend to start work here this month and hopefully wrap that up pretty quickly. Looking ahead at a couple of our upcoming meetings, on June 18th, a little bit of a full schedule. The Conway Place project that we talked about a little bit at our last meeting is a proposed residential rezoning for a residential PUD just behind the lots here behind the fire district, just next to City Hall. It's a 67-unit townhouse development. There was a good neighbor meeting held just a few weeks ago with the applicant and staff. A couple residents from around the area attended. Those are just a great opportunity for the applicant and staff to share some information before it reaches the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So we're hopeful that that will move forward on June 18th. Additionally, the folks up in Creekmore, they have submitted an application for the Edgewater at Creekmore 7th plat, which is just at the current terminus of Creekmore Drive in Hampstead. I believe they're building homes there in the Edgewater 6th phase right now. They have some really nice lakefront lots there that are being built out as we speak. I believe it's 10 or 11 lots that they're building out and platting as part of that, so a little bit smaller phase than we're used to seeing. On July 2nd, we have had an application as part of the Dean commercial that the commission approved several meetings ago. We have had our first application on the corner lot there at the intersection of 58 and Fox Ridge for a Hy-Vee convenience store, what they're dubbing their Fast and Fresh model for a really nice looking convenience store. So as part of that, they filed a final plat application. Obviously, as a use for a fueling station requires a conditional use permit as well as their site plan. So staff's been working with their development team here this week to review their site plan application and get some comments and feedback to them to proceed hopefully with their meeting on July 2nd. So a really exciting concept. We're excited to see how it pans out and hopefully they're able to move forward on their tight construction schedule. That would conclude staff report on our end. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And just curious, did you have any comments from Mr. Rokas to relate to us?
I do.
Okay.
So again, his apologies, he was not able to attend the meeting this evening. But again, as I report every time, Hawk Ridge Park is moving along. The rain's slowing. They're actually able to get out and do some paving hopefully this week. The contractor's pushing hard to get that project wrapped up here pretty soon. Evanbrook, just the extension of Sunset Lane south, kind of towards the southern city limits. That subdivision, the base layer of that road does have asphalt on it. They worked on the ADA ramps here this week, and they'll hopefully finish up paving here within the next couple of weeks to get those lots online within that subdivision. Westbrook 15th, they have installed the curbs. They were finished yesterday. Hopefully, if the weather continues to cooperate, they'll be able to again to get out and do some paving and finish up those streets there for that phase of Creekmore. And then thinking back last year, Prairie View of the Good Ranch, which is just off North Cass Parkway, Brook Parkway, kind of where North Cass Parkway turns south. As you come off the interchange there. I believe it was a 65 lots residential subdivision was approved as a replat by the commission back in early 2018, I believe. And the developers there are deciding to finally move forward with a portion of that phase. I think they're going to start with 29 lots and construct those, and then hopefully soon after that move on to the second phase to finish out that subdivision. But it's been a long time in the making. The contractor there has actually been working on the Evanbrook subdivision as well, so they were hoping to wrap that up before they started on Prairie View. But that'll be a good addition to our community and hopefully some residential activity down by the interchange. So that concludes my staff report for Mr. Rokos. Obviously, if there's any questions, I'm happy to relay those to him and get back to you all if necessary.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Grass. Any comments, questions? All right, at this time, we'll open the floor for public comment. If you wish to speak this evening, please come forward to the podium, give us your name and address for the record.
Sarah Gaston, 400 North Park Drive. Can we call it that yet? I really don't have much to say. I just want to thank you guys for all the work that you put in last week. I know it was, you were listening to a lot of comments about urban chickens and probably don't want to see chickens on your wall, but I feel like this is a little foreshadowing here. I'm going to have to thank the artist that has the new artwork, but Mr. Arkia, thank you for your motion, and Ms. Pfizer, Mr. Crane, who's not here, Mr. Wiggins, thank you for your vote. We'll see what happens at council.
Thank you. All right, let's move on ahead to commission member comment then. And Commissioner Arkia, may I start with you this evening?
Sure thing. As always, thank you, staff, for all that you do and for your guidance and help and everything we've got going on. Excited to kind of see and start seeing dirt moving around and things kind of happening. I'm kind of excited for the coming year.
Vice Chair Pfizer.
I don't really have anything to add. Just, again, thanks, everybody. And I'm kind of excited to see what's going to be happening, too. Thanks.
Commissioner Wiggins.
I'll just say dittos to what Commissioner Arkia said, and thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Peterman.
Same thing. Thank you, staff, Mr. Zur, for your knowledge on medical marijuana.
Oh, uh-oh.
That's all I got.
I don't know how to follow that. Thank you to staff. We certainly appreciate your support. And if there's nothing further this evening, I would entertain a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Commissioner Wiggins, second by Commissioner Peterman to adjourn. All those in favor, raise a hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we are legally adjourned. Thank you all.